through this door lies another dimension. One of beeps, one of boops. A reality where 8-bit and HD clash. This is the point where new retro meet. The 6.5 dimension, protected by the arcade overlord. You have crossed into the turbo zone.
Sometimes, life is rough, and you don't have a lot of money, but you still want to play video games. So what do? You're broke and you want to play some video games. Well, sit right there, don't fear, and get ready for my top 5 tips for gaming on a budget.
1.
Sometimes, you may want to buy the brand new games. The games that just come out, the games that cost $60. You can't buy a lot of those though, or else you'll spend all your money. So what's a good tip here? The tip is, more than likely, if you're into gaming, you have a last gen console laying around. For example, you might have a Wii, Xbox 360, PS3. It's a good tip to actually go and buy those games. Because a lot of those consoles, like the Wii or the 360, most retail chains like GameStop or other gaming stores carry those console games for super cheap. I mean, you can find good Wii games and good 360 games for $1-2. So that's a great way to get a bunch of games to play without spending a lot of money. Tip number 2 is clone consoles. If you want to get into retro gaming, but you don't want to dish out the money to buy an NES, a Super Nintendo, or a Genesis, luckily for you, there's consoles that can play all 3 of those, like the Retron 3, or there's other clone consoles that do duo, like NES and Super Nintendo, or some that just do Nintendo. It's a good way to get into retro gaming of the 8-bit and up era without having to spend a lot of money on actual hardware, and it saves you a lot of room. I use my Retron 5 a lot, and I mean, the Retron 5 isn't really that cheap, but clone consoles really aren't that bad. So if you're gaming on a budget and you want to get some retro game action in there, it's a good choice.
3.
Tip number 3 is, if you have a Game Boy or a Game Gear, maybe now is the time to buy those games. Typically, original Game Boy games and Game Gear games don't cost that much at all. You can find those games for $1, $2, $3 online for super cheap. Sometimes you can find them in lots. Just go out and explore. Of course, the higher end games that are more sought after are going to cost you. That's on any console. But if you fucking buy Godzilla on the Game Boy. Godzilla on the Game Boy is really good.
4.
Tip number 4, and this is probably my favorite tip, is to buy an Atari 2600. They aren't really that sought after right now. Most collectors that play retro games are more in the vein of the 8-bit era. They're more like NES fanboys and up. So the Atari 2600, the consoles itself, I bought mine, and mine's in great shape. I bought mine for $20 on eBay. And then all the games, I go to my retro gaming stores, and they have their games, just stacks and stacks of Atari games for like $1 each. Nobody wants these games, even though they're great titles. So if you want some retro action in your life, the Atari 2600 is a great console. And if you want some game recommendations, I've been doing an Atari 2600 game review series, so go check that out. There's a playlist on this channel.
5.
Tip 5 is import. Usually, if you're looking at a console that can play imports, the imports are cheaper. For example, if you're wanting to buy a game on the Super Nintendo, go for the Super Famicom version. It's not that hard to get Super Famicom games to work on a Super Nintendo. Same thing goes for Genesis. Same thing goes for most consoles. If you can look online, a lot of consoles, especially like Saturn, a lot of consoles, the games in the Japanese market are actually pretty cheap. That, Geeks and Gamers, should get you on your way to gaming on a budget. I know what it's like to have to scale back and buy cheaper games here and there. So before you go out there and you blow your next $60 on the Uncharted 8 or whatever is out at the time, maybe you should think about this. Maybe you should dial back and play smart.
Hey geeks and gamers, TurboBot90013 here. Remember to subscribe to the Turbo Zone for more content. The Arcade Overlords thank you. Stay retro. Turbo Zone.